Greetings, Dr. Mark Winton here, and I'd like to discuss in this video some of the research related to the effects the internet has had on our society and basically on us. I'll be drawing from several books, a lot coming from our book, Dr. Mark Winton and Dr. Barbara Mara, When Teachers, Clergy, and Caretakers Sexually Abuse Children and Adolescents. Also, some excellent resources that I've used. For example, Virtually You, The Dangerous Powers of the E-Personality, superb book indeed. Infinite Reality, Avatars, External Life, New Worlds, and the Dawn of the Virtual Revolution. And this is really a very popular one, Alone Together, Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other. Very interesting and insightful books indeed. So here we're going to verge a little bit from specifically focusing on crime and start thinking about how to maybe understand the effects of the internet, the networking that we have, the social media, and all that. I don't want to be identified as a social media expert, but simply as someone presenting some of the research. Obviously, some of you can see that I have not quite yet mastered the art of making professional-looking YouTube videos. Hopefully what I say is very helpful and useful, but obviously the lighting, there's no hair, no makeup, no special clothing and all that. It's basically turn the camera on, look at a PowerPoint and go, and think about what the science has to say, because that's really what matters. Symbolic interactionist theory is really out of sociology, and that's what I operate from in much of my research and analysis. And Dr. Bloomer, back in 1969 in his book, Symbolic Interactionism, talked about how social interactionism focuses primarily on social interaction, but also the self, role-taking, and also the meanings of symbols. So his big statement, which often is repeated in sociology, is that symbolic interactionism is based on the premise that people act based on meanings which derive from interactions with others and are interpreted by the individual. Now, Bloomer published this in 1969, long before the internet. I mean, that was the 60s. Basically, which was a very interesting time in itself, but I'll get into that maybe in another YouTube video on growing up in the 60s in San Francisco. But nevertheless, if you think about that, people act based on meanings which derive from interaction with others and are interpreted by the individual. Bloomer, I think, is extremely relevant when we think about the social media and social interaction online. We're basically, again, interacting maybe with bots, hopefully with people, with friends, family members, and the like, businesses, classrooms, students, whatever, but we act based on meanings. So we know we have to be very careful, for example, when we send emails. If I send an email to someone, I know that people don't know that I have this, people don't know whether I have a dynamic sense of humor or not, or if I'm a boring, monotone, person who doesn't really crack a joke or anything. They don't know that, so they have to try to interpret what I'm saying from an email, or I interpret what I'm saying from an email. And we're interacting online, so it's very different there. Obviously, people say all kinds of stuff online that they would never say when they were face to face. So we run into that situation. And then also interpreted by the individual. We make sense of things by interpreting whether or not something is, makes sense to us and how we derive meaning from that. I also include Gagnon and Simon's scripting theory, where they introduced this whole idea. While they're focusing on sexual behavior, we can certainly apply this to any other domains of interaction, looking at the scripts embedded in the who, what, where, when, and how. that who does the action, what do they do, where do they do it, when do they do it, how do they do it. Now, getting into the whole idea, Abu Jadad in his book in 2011 talks about the virtual personality. And on page 20, to cite him, he says, the virtual personality is more assertive, less restrained, a little bit on the dark side, and decidedly sexier. And so here we ask the question, can this lead to aggressive and deviant online fantasies that may be shared with others, leading to actions or interactions that would be shared in face-to-face interaction? So it's an interesting question to think how the virtual personality starts developing and how that interacts with the personality of ourself in face-to-face interactions versus this virtual personality. And so he also starts discussing that boundaries may become more clouded as we may have a different sense of self. I mean, who would have thought, 20 years ago, you could go ahead and use Twitter or Facebook and put your opinions, or set up blogs, or send pictures or selfies, or take videos and post them for everyone to see, or respond to politicians and actors and actresses and others in a variety of different modes. So Abu Jadad talks about 5 psychological forces related to the E-personality, and I think these are extremely relevant to think about, especially when we start thinking about criminal activity. Grandiosity, narcissism, darkness, regression or immaturity, and impulsivity. Now, if you think about that, some of those are characteristics that we talked about before when we talked about antisocial personality disorder from the DSM-5, but also the psychopath. And so, that gets us into this whole idea, well, does this make us more antisocial, the internet? I'm not going to answer that question, yes or no. I'm going to let you be the judge of this. Also, Blazkowicz and Bailenson, in their 2011 book, point out that, and to quote him, virtual reality will raise identity switching to whole new levels. And this leads to new issues as well, as they talk about in their book, that new social rules, new relationships, identities that will become that will develop, and how will that affect things as well? Interactions, how we make sense of ourselves, our personalities, our interactions, our networks. And according to Blazkowicz and Bailenson, that their research shows that those that engage in virtual reality are more likely to believe their virtual or avatar actions. And in one interesting study, Segovia and Bailenson in 2009 showed that by observing an avatar of oneself in virtual reality environment, false memories could be implanted in children. Now, anyone who does any investigatory work thinking about that whole idea of false memories could be implanted in children, that's a very relevant and important finding for investigatory purposes. And then back to Ogas and Gadam in their book, A Billion Wicked Thoughts, an amazing book I mentioned earlier. They found that, again, when they looked for what men and women searched for regarding sexuality, they found that for men, age was the most frequently searched variable in sexual searches, with a large proportion of men searching for underage female. But also they point out that older women were popular among male searchers as well. And so they talk about, and to cite them on page 175, they state forbidden acts have a very special power to arouse. So that gets us into more of looking at that particular aspect of the virtual personality and behavior in this situation. And if you think about what has happened with all this modern technology, taking a look just on what I title on my PowerPoint, what's on your neighbor's smartphone, because what's on your smartphone well, I don't know what's on your smartphone. What's on my smartphone? Nothing much, a bunch of sociological stuff. But what's on your neighbor's smartphone? Then I talk about some apps and what they're for. And this is also from our book. But Flirt Maps, for example, a dating service to meet people in your geographical vicinity. NRI's Connect, dating service that is GPS driven. My Yearbook, flirting dating service that is GPS driven. Grindr, GPS driven system to find gay, bi, or curious men. My Date, online dating. Date Chat, GPS driven dating service. Zoosk, online dating service. OkCupid, online dating service. Dating DNA, online dating service. And iSyn, adult dating, GPS driven service for adult matchmaking from soft to extreme. And they ask, what are you into? And then they provide options such as indoor, outdoor, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So it's interesting to think about, how has that changed relationships, how people meet, who people meet, what they do, and so on. And sometimes I give the example that how people can find each other for all kinds of reasons that maybe, in the city I live in, I of course doubt anyone's using these apps to have sex. Most likely they're trying to find people to play a game of chess or checkers or backgammon maybe. No, of course not. These are used quite frequently, and we're going to see a lot more research emerging on how they're used, the benefits as well as the risks, and how that has changed us. And I think where you are age-wise may, generationally or age cohort-wise may have an effect as well. Because I grew up in the 60s and 70s, that, my view of interactions, of relationships are very much embedded perhaps in that particular time period prior to the internet. And so I may view things a lot differently than one of my 21-year-old students who view relationships and networking and dating and interacting with social media very, very differently than I do, or others my age do, or maybe it varies by other variables as well, certainly. And then also that we get into the whole area that Blazkowicz and Bailenson talk about in terms of simulations. And we're still in the early stages, they say, of understanding the implications of virtual reality on ourselves and our behaviors. So, another example that they use and others have used is Second Life, and that simulated social network, if you will, how people may interact with these avatars. So the future really is extremely complex and unpredictable. And so we might ask, how will technology change fantasies, interactions, and behaviors? And we might also ask, will robots aid people with their paraphilias? Will they increase or reduce risks of sexual violence or violence? According to Turkle, and she points out on page 160, to quote her, our online selves develop distinct personalities. I think that really is where we should start focusing a lot more research and begin to think about online selves and distinct personalities. And does that lead to depersonalization, or does it lead to other characteristics? So we need to look at all this, the intersection of these social and technological trends and how they have changed people for the better or for the worse, and the effects. And then again, I think very important to start to think about predicting what we're going to see down the road, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, and how we can begin to make sense of this from a legal, criminological, sociological, psychological perspective. And this wraps up this video. Thank you. Oh yes, and this is for the University of Central Florida. my courses that I teach there. But if you're not a University of Central Florida student, I'm extremely happy and pleased that you took the time to watch this video, and hope that it was useful. Thank you.